Morning, everybody. Morning, Emily.
Good morning. Happy Tuesday.
We have a wonderful show for you today. Arami Osing, Frimpong, Stephen Donziger, and Team Rising will be here.
Vice President Kamala Harris was in Guatemala yesterday. That's where we're going to start this morning. She was addressing immigration issues for her first foreign trip as VP. She had some choice words for the tens of thousands of Central Americans seeking asylum.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez responded quickly to Kamala Harris on Twitter.com. This is disappointing to see. First, seeking asylum at any U.S. border is a 100% legal method of arrival. Second, the U.S. spent decades contributing to regime change and destabilization in Latin America. We can't help set someone's house on fire and then blame them for fleeing. Let's pick up on that last point for a moment before we go to the media reaction to Kamala Harris's response as compared to how they responded to Trump's very similar comments. So what AOC is referring to is the U.S. imperial role in Central America, which you can't avoid when you're thinking about an issue like this, though the U.S. media loves to avoid it. But so just a very quick sketch for people who don't know or forgot. Early 1950s, there was a Guatemalan reform movement that said, look, all of these oligarchs own all of this land. They're doing nothing with it but growing a couple of bananas that they're exporting around the country. What we need is land reform. What we need here is social democracy. And so they elect Jacobo Arbenz, and he introduces fairly modest land reform. And he says he's going to pay the oligarchs, for the land that he appropriates in order to distribute it to peasants so that they can, have an actual piece of soil that they can grow. Now, it turned out that United Fruit in particular was lying about the value of its land holdings. And so when Arbenz offered to pay them what they said their property was worth, they were like, wait a minute, that was just for tax purposes. we don't want your money. We want to hold on to this land. And so they collaborate with the Dulles brothers, the United States, and in a coup, they overthrow Arbenz. And that sparks a civil war that eventually lasts into the 1990s, killing tens of thousands of people. Once the Civil War is over, the U.S. starts deporting a ton of ex-gang members from the United States down into Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, elsewhere, further destabilizing the culture. And so now you have all of these American gangs that are down in Central America. They have American names to their gangs. And so for the last 20 years, they've further fueled destabilization in the country. So literally for the last 70 years, the U.S. has only contributed to destabilization, which is then sparking this refugee crisis, which then has both Democrats and Republicans saying, no, stay down there.
Right. And so I don't dispute that any of that is relevant. I think it totally is. I mean, it's hard to even fathom. This is stuff that happened in people's lifetimes, right? And the disconnect between the fact that this is very recent history and in people's recent memories and its lack of relevance in the news media's context and conversation about this issue, I think is crazy, given that, as Ryan just walked us through, you can go back to the 50s, sure, but this is something that has happened even much more recently than that. I'd also add, and this is more in response to AOC's tweet, I mean, I don't necessarily think that Kamala Harris was blaming Guatemalans for fleeing. I didn't hear that in what Kamala Harris said. But secondly, I think it's also important to remember that the United States has given about $1.6 billion to Guatemala in aid over the last decade. And so while there's the destabilization, we have tried. But, it's like, where is that money going? It's one of those situations where we're just pouring foreign aid into another country. And what are we doing with it?
Right. And the phenomena are connected because the billions in aid that we send down there goes to prop up the oligarchs. And the oligarchs remain powerful because reform movements and left movements in Central and Latin America and all around the world learned specifically from actually 1954 and Arbenz that any democratic attempt to reform the system is going to be met with hostility and opposition from the United States. Actually, Che Guevara happened to be in Guatemala while this coup was unfolding, and he watched as Arbenz didn't fight back hard enough and just caved and turned over the country to the right and to the U.S. And it was in that moment where he decided, no, the only way to beat the Yankees is violently. He persuaded Castro of that. It became his mantra. That if you want to fight against the United States, you can't do it through the ballot box because the United States doesn't respect the ballot box. And so as a result of that, you have all of these different civil wars and insurgencies throughout the decades, which means that any money that you're funding and that you're spending in foreign aid, just gets gobbled up by oligarchs and fuels more corruption that fuels more violence.
Well, and again, Biden wants Harris to commit $4 billion in additional aid to Guatemala, which is, I guess it's a nice sentiment. But again, if you're not going to say that this needs to be distributed more efficiently or more effectively, it's just continuing to pour money into a broken system, and it's not going to get any. I mean, it basically makes this symbolic and useless, right? Like going down there and saying, we're going to keep doing exactly what we've been doing, but we're going to do it with a little bit more money.
Right.
Good luck.
Right, and we haven't even touched on the role of narco trafficking and the corruption that is also fueled by the U.S. The U.S. was completely fine. Combating narco trafficking not only took a back seat in U.S. foreign policy in the 1980s, but in fact it was openly tolerated as a funding mechanism for its funding of right-wing death squads. And so the marriage of the oligarchs, the right wing, and the narco traffickers has further contributed to the crisis that we're seeing, and that too was all fueled and encouraged by the United States. So if they're going to actually improve the system, what the United States would have to do is actually either get out of the way or help to empower social movements in the country. But those social movements run right up against all of the U.S.'s best friends in the region.
Right. I was going to say, I mean, if you're wondering why the strategy is to continue to double down on just sort of pouring aid and having that as a talking point into the country, it's because at the end of the day, any real change to how the aid is distributed would be fraught.
Right. You think they're going to crack down on the oligarchs? No.
Right.
That's not what they're going to do. And so, in some ways, Trump's policy at least was more honest.
Oh yeah.
And so let's put up the comparison between how the media responded when Donald Trump got xenophobic to how the media responded when Kamala Harris got xenophobic. So here on the one side you have Trump. Our country is full. Trump's declaration carries far-right echoes that go back to the Nazi era. That's Washington Post headline. And the Post headline, the second one, Harris warns Guatemalans they will be turned back if they come to the U.S. border illegally. Emily?
Okay, so I would dispute that there's anything wrong with saying our country is full. Where Ryan sees xenophobia, I see something, and you can actually, there could be a fair conversation about the motives behind saying our country is full. I think on its own, that is, I mean, it's a true statement in terms of like the poverty that exists in this country versus the way that we're approaching it. I guess I can understand the sentiments behind it. So I don't necessarily have a problem with the merits of that point, but I do think that there's something to be said from both of our positions on this. Watching the legacy media treat one person with just vastly different, I mean, this is kid gloves for Kamala Harris.
Right. So two points on that. I actually think that the idea that we're full isn't accurate. Like if you go around this country, there's a lot of space left.
Yeah, I agree. I should say I agree with that.
And not just that, but we're an aging country, and our as we've talked about here, our birth rate is not replacing at the way that it used to. And in order for an economy to grow, you need people working. You need value being created by workers. And so to have this kind of bifurcated conversation that we're having now, where you have all of these business owners saying that they have no one to be able to work any of the jobs, help wanted, please help us, and you have more job openings than you have job seekers. That's a situation where if there are people who wanted jobs, you actually could create room for them and benefit everybody. And I think also people overestimate the population of Central America. The people imagine that there's going to be this massive horde of people just pouring over the border, but the population is relatively small, and most people don't actually want to come here. So if you created a legal pathway to say, you know what, here are the jobs that we have here in the United States, you have to work them legally, so there can't be exploitation, so you're not going to drive wages down. It wouldn't be the massive influx of that people think that it would. On the other hand, liberals don't, and progressives really don't want to talk about how dangerous that trip is.
That's where I was just going to go.
But go ahead. But it is, in fact, incredibly dangerous, and a system where the status quo is that you're asking 8 and 9-year-olds and their parents to take this perilous 1,000-mile journey across the desert and on trains is cruel.
Yes, and progressives and the left generally don't want to talk about it. The media actually doesn't want to talk about it, even though it's a fascinating but dark and tragic story. This is something that props up cartels to the tunes of multiple millions of dollars every single year. It is a business. They make money off of people risking life and limb and dying and suffering sexual assault. It is a horrific journey where people have to pay cartels basically to protect them as they make their way up to the United States border, and the benefit goes to the cartels. The money goes to the cartels so that the cartels can continue terrorizing the region. And it's something that is a hugely important piece of the context here, especially when, people are saying, don't make this trip. It should be coupled with don't make this trip. It's extremely dangerous and you shouldn't have to pay the cartels. And we can't have people continuing to pay the cartels so that they can destabilize the region. And it's not, it's not just the media. It's also Democrats too. As Biden keeps Trump's immigration laws intact, Democrats make the case still that it's somehow, quote, less racist when it's Joe Biden. We have a clip here that illustrates this pretty well.
Is it less racist for Biden to continue this immigration policy because he's a Democrat?
Well, I think when Trump was doing it, that it was based on a dark heart, that there was racial animus there. Now, I don't believe for a second that Joe Biden has the same dark heart toward immigrants that Donald Trump did. Joe Biden is not a racist bigot the way that Donald Trump was.
I actually wrote a piece in the Federalist a couple of weeks ago about what a brilliant interviewer I think Z-Way is. She's sort of like old school comedian in that she's we don't have a lot of comedians that actually challenge power in the way that Z-Way does. I'm a huge fan of hers, but that is a really interesting clip. It's kind of what we were getting into. Do I think Trump has, ulterior motives when it comes to immigration? Do I think it's red meat to the base? Yeah, absolutely. But to then argue that Joe Biden is doing it purely out of compassion and his altruistic spirit, I think is a very different thing for the left and for the media to do.
My own view on this, and I'm curious for your take, is that, and it's not something that either party could really run on, but I feel like the borders should be treated more like borders are within the United States or within the European Union. That as long as you have strong labor protections, you have the right to organize unions, everybody's playing from a level playing field. Just caging people inside these small areas like Guatemala is itself cruel, and given the 70 years of destabilization, why not be a little bit more generous to people there, and you'll have an interplay back and forth that will then lead to development in Guatemala. And most people in Guatemala will want to stay in Guatemala. The United States is a wonderful place, but people don't come here because they're desperate to get to the United States. They come because they're desperate to leave the violence and the corruption. They're trying to stay alive. But if they could go back, they would prefer that. And so, if you can find a way to have economic growth for everybody, that seems like everybody benefits.
Yeah, no, I probably couldn't be further apart from you on that issue. I think strong borders are really important. I think it's just an important aspect of maintaining security and order and using taxpayer dollars effectively in the way that they should. And I think, again, when Trump says something like our country is full, well, I agree with you. There's plenty of open space, and we actually do need we do need more workers. We need more people because of our birth rate. Absolutely agree with that. I think what he's getting at there is, and I'm not trying to put a favorable spin on it. I think he actually is getting at the fact that, like, versus the way we're actually spending our money and using our resources in this country, we can't afford to be taking care of a huge new group of people when we have to focus on our own people who right now who are suffering in disenfranchised communities and elsewhere. I think that's sort of where that's going. But at the same time, it is, to me, very crucial that we have a strong sort of grip on what's happening at the border, that we know who's coming in and out of the country. Maybe there's an argument from your perspective that that's actually easier to do when you have a different system.
Right. This isn't working.
Right. Well, yeah, that is absolutely true. I feel like we just found the point of agreement that we can end on.
There you go.
The system isn't working, but the media will say it is when the Democrats are in power.
Yeah, it's not working. It's killing people. It sucks. We'll tell you what's on our radars next.